World leaders are arriving in the United States here in Washington today ahead of a three-day NATO summit. Leaders from NATO's 32 member countries, as well as several allies of the alliance, are gathering in Washington to mark 75 years since NATO was formed. During today's White House briefing, National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby indirectly slammed former President Donald Trump while defending President Biden's work with the alliance.
Rather than browbeaten and insulting and demeaning allies, this president has invested in allies and partnerships. The president's record speaks for itself, and the allies and the non-NATO friends and partners that are coming as well, they know that. They wouldn't be coming. New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, to a NATO summit if they didn't believe in American leadership and how important it is, and if they didn't believe that President Biden takes that responsibility extremely seriously.
And our Major Garrett is with me now in our D.C. studio. Major, good to see you. So 75th anniversary of NATO, that would have been a big headline in and of itself. Of course, though, all eyes are on the president, his condition, and these growing calls from within his own party to step aside from the ticket. How do you assess what the president has to do here with all these world leaders this week?
What was meant to be a celebration, 75 years of NATO, launched in Washington, D.C. 75 years ago. So it's a kind of a full circle moment in the history of the alliance, is overshadowed by the president's political difficulties and what will inevitably be, Caitlin, persistent questions to world leaders and those traveling in their retinue. What do you think about Biden? How does he look to you? What is his firmness or capabilities as you've seen them in the 3.5 years of his presidency? Those stories are going to engulf this entire celebratory atmosphere, plus deliberations about what exactly will become the future of Ukraine and NATO. What is a bridge? What does that mean? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? And what will the alliance do to help the Ukrainians not only survive this summer, but prepare for what appears to be an inevitable and brutal winter, with power system generation failing in Ukraine because of persistent Russian missile and artillery attacks? How does Ukraine carry on credibly, militarily, and hold its country together against the ongoing Russian onslaught, intensified even in the last 48 hours by more than 3 dozen civilian deaths? So all of that is part of this, but Biden is central to this, but in ways he was not expecting to be central to it. And I've been talking to Democratic lawmakers over the weekend, and they say, look, don't talk about Biden, don't criticize, don't get disunified. You'll overtake the NATO summit. They're like, hey, the NATO summit's already overtaken. That's inevitable because of the debate performance. So you have something that is a freestanding event, all planned. The communique's largely been written. Much of what the alliance is going to say has already been predetermined. But that thrust will be interrupted by all of the president's other side political problems.
Yeah, and I know we've said a lot this year, and in political years, the stakes are high. Of course, this is an instance where the world is quite literally watching how Biden's going to do. And the White House said today he's going to have a press conference around the NATO summit. Obviously, big spotlight on him for lots of reasons that you just described. But in your conversations with Democrats, how are they kind of looking to how he handles that moving forward?
There's this great conversation. By great, I mean consequential. Democrats don't know what to do. They have two realities. One, the president doesn't want to budge. And two, DNC rules that will oversee the Democratic National Convention allow him to stay if he doesn't want to budge. So those are two facts. The great conversation is, what do we do about those facts? Because anxiety about the president's ability not only to articulate the message, to carry the fight to Donald Trump, but to rebound in places that everyone knows are going to be close, the 7 battlegrounds, but also restore Democratic prospects in places that looked 3 weeks ago pretty secure. Virginia, New Hampshire, Minnesota. If those are on the map, that is dreadful for Democrats. They can't have those states on the map. They need to reassess, and they're trying to reassess and say to the president, are you the best person at this moment? Biden says, guess what I am? they have doubts, but they don't know how to translate those doubts into action. And so you have a lot of inaction and a lot of people talking on cable television, a lot of frantic text messages going back and forth, but not much else. And if all you got is cable news and text messages, you're not going to dislodge a sitting president who wants to be renominated and has twice as many delegates as he needs.
And is completely dug in, as we've seen from his comments today. I want to talk about Donald Trump because uncharacteristically for him, he has kind of been, taking the back seat and letting this news cycle play out. Of course, that rule in politics, let your opponent kind of suffer if they are. But when it comes to NATO, I mean, he's famously been critical of NATO, famously been critical of our allies not paying enough into the alliance. How does that kind of factor into how the world leaders are kind of thinking about this heading into this summit?
So when President Biden, in one of the exchanges that was not hampered by his otherwise poor performance at the debate, asked former President Trump a question. Will you get out of NATO? And Trump shrugged. No answer. Now, I've covered NATO summits where President Trump was there, and I saw him hector and cajole and insult, but not in a vacuum. Those harsh words did send some of those nations sort of back to their budget books, and they did meet the 2% gross domestic product threshold on defense spending. But those numbers have increased under Biden's administration. So if that was Trump's real concern about NATO, he ought to, broadly speaking, be celebrating what's happened. More NATO countries than ever, 23 of 32 are now at that 2% number, which is a vast improvement. It improved under Trump. It improved ever so slightly under Obama when this actual hectoring really began. Robert Gates, the defense secretary under President Obama, set this all in motion, but it's gotten better consistently. Trump should celebrate that. You don't hear anything about that. And that shrug at the debate sort of encapsulated in a personal way his indifference toward the NATO alliance, which, while they're talking about Biden, they're also going to be talking to themselves while they're here. Oh my gosh, is it going to be Trump? And if so, how do we protect NATO? How do we protect Europe from either that indifference or that sort of Putin-friendly, low-level hostility? That's the other conversation that will be going on this week here.
Well, we will be paying attention to how world leaders are being asked and what they say. 2 questions about the current president as well. Major Garrett, thank you, as always, for your time and reporting.